Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Let me share Olivia's story. One carelessness, one bad decision, and my life, my marriage, it all fell apart. How could I not realize that one mistake would change my fate so much? The day my husband caught me with his boss was the point of no return. He didn't hesitate to take revenge. I admit my guilt, but my husband's revenge exceeded all limits. His actions were too cruel. He cunningly planned his revenge and I unknowingly fell into his trap. Now I have to face the consequences of my actions. Let me introduce myself. My name is Patricia, I'm 27 years old and I own a fast food chain. My husband, Michael, is a 30-year-old business analyst. Our marriage was only 3 years old, but sadly, we are now no longer together. The story of how we met goes back a long way. Michael was 18 when his family moved to our neighborhood. I was only 15 at the time. Since then we have been close, you might say childhood friends. Michael and his family's fate brought them to our town due to his father's transfer to a new job. At that time Michael was quite unfamiliar with our neighborhood, but gradually things changed. Our parents became close friends, and Michael and I, although we had our little disagreements and often argued over nothing, we found common ground. Michael was an unusual child. He showed no interest in playing games or socializing with other children, preferring to spend his time with books. He was an introvert, which made him special in my eyes. A few months after Michael and his family moved in, we became close. From then on, we became friends, often spending time together, especially when his family invited us over for dinner. We went to the same high school and even graduated college together, but during those years we were nothing more than friends and neighbors. That all changed 2 years after graduating from college. Michael asked me out on a date, starting a new chapter in our story. I was looking forward to being Michael's girlfriend. I had liked him for a long time, but I hid my feelings for fear of rejection. Even though we were friends, I didn't want to jeopardize our relationship. But luckily, things turned out differently. We started dating and a year later we decided to get married. Our wedding was unforgettable. I was sure that I had made the right decision. We loved each other and everything seemed perfect. After the wedding, our life together was going well. We were an ordinary happy couple, striving to find our way in life, and we decided to do without financial help from our parents, relying only on ourselves. Our union strengthened the relationship between our families. Michael was a great husband, he arranged regular dates, gave gifts, and I have never regretted that I married him. Our marriage only brought us closer together. A year after the wedding, Michael had made significant progress in his career. His professional advice was valued within the company and he became his boss's personal assistant, which was a great accomplishment for him. After Michael was promoted thanks to Michelle, our life went on as usual, full of happiness and harmony. At the same time, I opened my own fast food restaurant and Michael was my support in this endeavor. He always supported my business, coming to help me whenever he had free time. The beginning was not easy. The first few months were a big challenge, but thanks to Michael's support, we overcame all the difficulties. Michael would also bring his co-workers to the restaurant for breakfast, lunch or dinner, which helped our business tremendously. One day, while I was busy tallying the day's sales, I received a call from Michael's mom, Tricia. We quickly exchanged greetings. The relationship between Tricia and I was very warm. She considered me her daughter-in-law, or rather even the daughter she never had. Tricia, the mother of 4 boys, including Michael, had always had a special fondness for me. After our usual greeting, Tricia informed me of her plan to throw a surprise party for Michael's father's 60th birthday. She said she needed my help to organize this surprise and I was more than happy to help. I was thrilled at the opportunity to help Tricia and enthusiastically agreed. After hanging up the phone, I was already anticipating the upcoming event. That same day, Michael and I went to his parents' house to make all the necessary arrangements for the surprise. Everything was meticulously planned and organized, except of course for the birthday boy himself, Michael's father, Dave. Tricia had imposed a strict warning about the secrecy of the event, and we all followed her instructions. Dave's birthday arrived, and the surprise was a success. The party was filled with drinks, delicious food, and everyone brought gifts. Michael and I also prepared a particularly thoughtful gift for the birthday boy. The evening turned into a fun and memorable event for all the guests. The party ended around 10 p.m. and the guests slowly began to disperse. Michael and I returned home, tired but satisfied with a wonderful time we had spent. That night was filled with fatigue and joy at the same time, and we went straight to bed after returning home. The next morning I woke up, turned around to the other side of the bed and, as usual, didn't find Michael next to me. He had probably left early for work. After getting out of bed, I started getting ready for the day and headed to my restaurant. After doing my morning chores, I left the house. Upon arriving at the restaurant, I found that there were many orders waiting for us. My staff and I immediately got to work and efficiently handled the morning rush of customers. Shortly after opening, my husband walked into the restaurant along with his boss Raphael. Raphael wanted to have breakfast with us that morning. He had visited our restaurant many times before, sometimes coming with customers. I was used to his presence, so I took out their order myself. Guys. My employee Kate served their table while my husband and his boss ate breakfast. I sat in the corner and watched them. They were discussing business, and there was a moment when I didn't quite get the gist of their conversation. But after a few minutes, they finished and were ready to leave the restaurant. That day was special. Raphael, my husband's boss, generously left me a huge tip for the delicious meal. At first I tried to refuse, but he insisted, and I glanced at Michael to see if he agreed. Seeing that Michael didn't mind, I accepted the tip gratefully. I was very happy and thanked Raphael for his generosity. After they left, I returned to the restaurant and continued my work. 2 months passed and it was our 3rd wedding anniversary. On this special day, I got up very early, even before Michael. I planned to surprise him. When Michael woke up, we exchanged congratulations and joyfully celebrated our anniversary. I was especially pleased that he hadn't forgotten about it despite his busy schedule. We got dressed and headed to work. That day I left work earlier than usual, because I wanted to prepare a surprise for Michael. It was our 3rd year together. I called him and asked him to come home early. Michael assured me he would. That night, I decided to make it special. When I got home, I cooked a delicious dinner so that we could have dinner together. Everything was ready. I lit candles, creating a romantic atmosphere, waiting just for the two of us. When my husband came home, I stood at the door, anticipating his reaction. He was amazed and so happy to see that I had taken the time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged warmly and headed to the dinner table. It turned out that Michael didn't stay in debt either and brought me a gift. We exchanged gifts and words of love and then enjoyed dinner. After dinner, we cleared the table and settled down to watch our favorite shows. But I was tired, and I fell asleep while watching. In the morning, I woke up to find myself in bed. Michael must have put me to bed. The thought made me smile. I laughed to myself as I remembered that warm and cozy evening. As usual, Michael left early for work, and I decided not to go to the restaurant that day. Instead, I wanted to visit my parents, whom I hadn't heard from in a while because of my busy work schedule. After calling Michael, I informed him of my plan. He approved of my decision and asked me to come home early, to which I agreed. After getting ready, I left the house. I decided not to warn my parents about my visit, hoping to surprise them. It took only 15 minutes to get to my parents' house. We lived very close to each other. After parking the car, I walked up to the door of their house. Knocking. I heard no answer. The house was quiet, and I began to worry that something was wrong. Remembering the code to the door, I went inside. There was no one in the house. All the things were neatly arranged in their places. With some concern, I pulled out my phone to call my father, but his phone line was disconnected. Finding my parents' phone lines disconnected, I was gripped with worry and fear. Thoughts rushed through my head until I got my mom on the phone. Relieved, I listened to her reply. It turned out everything was fine. They were visiting a friend in a nearby neighborhood. I was relieved to hear that they were okay. Before ending the conversation, I informed my mom that I would wait for their return. A few hours later, my parents returned home. Seeing them safe and healthy, I was overjoyed. We spent some time talking, after which I headed back home. Arriving home around 6 p.m., I found that Michael had not yet returned. After calling him, I learned that he was on his way. I went into the house, freshened up and went downstairs, reflecting on the conversation with my mom. I really missed them and felt happy to have spent time in their company. In those moments when I was immersed in reminiscing about my time with my mom, Michael suddenly walked in. His sudden arrival startled me a little, since he usually knocks on the door. Apparently, I had forgotten to lock it. We exchanged greetings and asked each other about our day. Michael went upstairs to change, and I went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. A few minutes later, he came downstairs, ate dinner, and went straight back to the bedroom. His behavior seemed unusual to me, as it was not in his habits. Going up to him, I asked if everything was all right. Michael replied that he was just tired after work and wanted to rest. Indeed, he looked very tired. I decided to join him in bed. We lay down to rest, ending this day filled with memories and little surprises. Michael's continued unusual behavior over the next few weeks began to worry me. His constant mood swings were exhausting. After several attempts, I finally pressed him for an explanation. After persuasion, he admitted that the grueling work that his boss, Raphael, was imposing on him was the cause of his fatigue. This surprised me, as he had previously claimed that there was not much work at this time of year. Michael explained that the company was expanding the business and it was taking a tremendous amount of effort on his part. I decided to step in and talk to Raphael. I knew it was a risky move, but I needed to do something to ease the burden on my husband. He himself probably wouldn't complain to his boss since he loved his job. 2 days later, while at the restaurant, I received a call from Michael. He informed me of a sudden business trip. It seemed like a good time to meet with Raphael to discuss the situation. I was sure of the rightness of my decision to visit Raphael's office, as it was for my husband's well-being. After finishing all my business, I went to their office. Every time I went there, I admired the organization and atmosphere of the workspace. Upon arriving at the office, I asked Raphael's assistant for an appointment, but she replied that I did not have an appointment. As I tried to explain that I was familiar with Raphael, I encountered a misunderstanding. As I was about to leave, I saw Raphael coming out of the office. I approached him and explained the situation. To my relief, he apologized and invited me into his office. I got straight to the point, telling him about Michael's poor health and his overwork at work. Raphael listened calmly and told me that he planned to reduce Michael's working hours. At first I was frightened, thinking I might have jeopardized his job, but Raphael quickly reassured me by explaining that reducing my hours did not mean Michael would be fired. While I was relieved after talking to Raphael, I was simultaneously worried about Michael's reaction if he found out about my visit to his boss without his knowledge. I asked Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael, and he agreed. When Raphael escorted me out of the office and put his hand on my lower back, I felt uncomfortable. His gesture seemed inappropriate given that I was the wife of his employee. After returning home, I called Michael. In conversation, He said he was feeling better and that his trip would last longer because Raphael had offered him time to rest. I wondered why he couldn't rest at home, to which Michael replied that he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I accepted this, realizing that work can be very stressful. We said our goodbyes and I went to bed. Life went on as it should. Michael was fine where he was, and my business at the restaurant was picking up. That afternoon at the restaurant, I noticed Raphael entering with a group of men in suits and assumed they were his coworkers. I asked the staff to serve them while I went about my business. After a few hours, I decided it was time to leave early to visit Trisha, but I noticed that Raphael was still in the restaurant, alone this time. As I approached him to say hello, I was unexpectedly asked to join him for a drink. I accepted, not wanting to seem rude. As we talked, I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting conversationalist. He told me about his journey to success, starting at an early age, despite coming from a wealthy family and having to work hard. I also shared Michael's success story with him and expressed my admiration for how my husband achieved what he has today. It was an enjoyable and candid conversation. I truly admired Raphael's dedication to his business. After I finished my drink, I informed Raphael of my upcoming dinner meeting with Michael's mom. He offered to give me a ride since it was getting dark, and I accepted. On the way, we continued our conversation, and I realized that I had underestimated Raphael. He was a very charming and easygoing man, despite his austere appearance. After saying goodbye to Raphael, I met up with Trisha. She said she hadn't seen me in months, though that was an exaggeration. We spent time at the evening dinner discussing Michael's latest business trip and gossiping. After dinner, I returned home and went straight to bed, intending to talk to Michael's parents the next day. The next morning I woke up ready for a new day of work when Michael called. He informed me that his boss, Raphael, was coming home to pick up some important documents he had left with us. I realized that I was late for work, but I decided to wait for Raphael. As I was finishing my breakfast, the doorbell rang. It was Raphael. I invited him in and handed him my forgotten papers. In return, he handed me the earrings I had left in his car the night before. I thanked him and headed for the door to see him out, but he asked me to make him a cup of coffee. I agreed, because Raphael was a really nice person. During the coffee, Raphael continued to flirt with me. At first I didn't take his words seriously. He said that I was beautiful and that Michael was lucky to have me, but I didn't pay much attention to it. As time went on, however, Raphael started showing up at my restaurant more often and continued to flirt. Sometimes he would come and just sit for hours, watching me work and waiting for me to finish. These days I began to notice his charming side in Raphael. One morning I found a bouquet of flowers left for me on my desk. Looking at the card, I discovered Raphael's signature, a discovery that brightened my day. A moment later, as if confirming my perception, Raphael called. Our conversation was filled with laughter. His words brought joy like rays of sunshine through the clouds. Suddenly, however, I had to interrupt this flow of merriment. A call from another man divided our communication. I felt no guilt in shifting my attention to my husband, convinced that my relationship with Raphael carried no weight worthy of concern. In the course of our conversation with my husband, we touched on the subject of his return. The absence of his presence left a void in my soul, and the news of his imminent reunion in a week filled me with anticipation. I didn't want to be enveloped again in the loneliness that seemed inevitable in his absence. The next day, as if sensing my mood, Raphael asked when the last time I'd allowed myself the joy of dining out was. Finding no answer in my memory, I accepted his offer of a friendly dinner. Thinking that the encounter was only innocent in nature convinced me that there was no cause for concern, especially since it would be a few more days before Michael returned. Accepting Raphael's offer, I prepared for the evening. His choice of dinner venue surprised me. He'd guessed my favorite restaurant, which added to the evening's charm. Dinner with Raphael was easy and relaxed, his calming ability filled the atmosphere with warmth. As time passed, I noticed how quickly the evening passed, leaving us in an almost empty place. I felt insecure under the influence of the drink. Raphael, concerned for my well-being, offered to drive me home, but I, aware of the late hour and not wanting a long drive, asked to find a nearby hotel. Raphael, however, offered the alternative of spending the night in his guest room. The suggestion seemed reasonable and I agreed. When I arrived at his house, I felt cheerful and somewhat confused. Raphael supported me by helping me change. The situation suddenly turned more intimate, our kisses were spontaneous, leading to a new round of feelings. At that moment I was aware of my desire for continuation, although I couldn't quite gather my thoughts. That passionate moment was the last vivid memory before the night swallowed up consciousness. At dawn I awoke to the unpleasant sensation of a headache, gradually realizing that I was in an unfamiliar place. Before I could gather my thoughts, the sound of my husband's voice made me wince. He was standing at the threshold, his gaze full of horror and incomprehension. I turned around to find Raphael beside me, and at that moment I saw the deep pain in Michael's eyes, realizing the depth of what had happened. Silently, I left the room, trying to get dressed and catch up with Michael, but Raphael tried to stop me, begging me to wait. Inwardly, I felt that lingering here was the last thing I needed. Relieved, I hurried to look for Michael, but he was gone. After unsuccessful attempts to contact him, I returned home, hoping to find him there, but he had disappeared. As the days went by, the lack of answers from Michael only added to my despair. When Raphael showed up at the restaurant, I asked him about Michael, but he couldn't help. That moment was the last straw. I realized that it was time to face my problems face to face and talk openly. With the awakening of a new day, I felt the determination to start fresh, deciding to put all worries aside for a while and focus on myself. It was a moment of realization that despite all the challenges, I must put my well-being first. Discovering that the doors to my restaurant remained closed at an hour when business was usually booming, I felt a mixture of shock and bewilderment. This never-before-seen phenomenon was immediately explained by the newspaper handed to me stating that I no longer owned my business as it had been sold. The initial thought of a joke quickly faded away as the realization of the reality of events became inexorably clear. In desperation, I tried to contact Michael, who I felt was the only one who could truly understand what was happening. However, unable to reach him, I turned to Raphael for help. His arrival and his explanation that Michael, acting as the rightful owner, had sold the restaurant struck a chord with me. Disbelief was replaced by the pain of realizing that what had happened was the irreparable result of my own actions. Tears, helplessness, and despair accompanied me home, where I faced the final act of tragedy. My belongings had been taken outside and Michael was waiting for me with divorce papers. This moment epitomized the complete collapse of my world, a lost business, a broken marriage, and an inability to find understanding or forgiveness. Standing before the wreckage of my life, I struggled to find the words to express the storm of emotions raging inside. My plea to Michael, filled with a desperate desire to find understanding, was met with his intransigence. He stood before me, armed with divorce papers as a symbol of the final decision to destroy everything we had once built together. His explanation about the house being in his name alone sounded like a judgment, robbing me of my last hope for justice. My attempt to find solace in the understanding of others turned against me. Comments filled with judgment and resentment only added to my pain, making me doubt my own worth. The reflection of their words in my heart was a reminder that I may be the cause of my own downfall. Admitting my mistakes and realizing the consequences was a bitter lesson. My life seemed to crumble under the weight of loss, the home I thought was a refuge, the marriage that promised to be a pillar, and the restaurant, the embodiment of my dreams and efforts, were all ruthlessly taken away. Facing the reality that Michael, the man I trusted most, had turned out to be so selfish only intensified my pain. Yet, in the heart of this storm, I found the strength to recognize my share of responsibility for what had happened. Maybe that's what karma is, a cruel but fair teacher. Now, standing in the wreckage of my former life, I am beginning to realize that ahead is a journey of rebuilding and learning about myself. The opportunity to rethink and rebuild my life, though seemingly an insurmountable task, is now the only way forward. In this journey of self-discovery and restoration of personal worth, I must find a way to forgive myself and, perhaps one day, Michael,